5 dimensions, 10 kingdoms, 9 cities, 1 story. Welcome to Arclanders Assemble, the weekly podcast of the Arcverse. Each week, Teamverse will take you on a guided tour from the streets of Arc to the icebound islands of Celestium. There'll be GMing tips, world-building advice, plus monsters, heroes and lore. Join us for this ride through our 5th edition compatible universe and answer the call to arms, Arclanders Assemble! Welcome again to Arclanders Assemble, the weekly podcast for the Arcverse, but it's also a weekly podcast for creators, it's a weekly podcast for GMs, and a weekly podcast for players and Kickstarters, and really anybody else that's in the RPG niche. We are lucky enough in this kind of historical and technological moment that we exist in, that social media and the kind of resurgence of RPGs and fantasy culture in general has created this huge community online of basically really cool, well-meaning, awesome people. A few unbelievably terrible ones, but we try to avoid them. All kind of pulling together to create great experiences for one another, to back great Kickstarters, and to generally go about things with really, really goodwill. If you ever get yourself to a convention, Gen Con in America or over here UKGE, you normally find it's chock full of awesome people. So I guess we're really, really fortunate. So one of the reasons for Arclanders Assemble isn't just that we want to talk about our fantasy world, because that all gets a bit self-indulgent after a while. There are some amazing things to talk about, and we'll get onto the news section in a moment. But what we're really doing here is trying to create a resource for the whole community, and if you spend all your time asking and taking without giving back, well, a poor and lonely life you shall lead. So let's not go down that road. Anyway, we've got an amazing show for you today, if I dare say so myself. So we've got some exciting news coming up about the Book of the Phantasm and about the Arclander. And then we're going to look on the question of knights, because we have a character origin in the Arcverse for 5th edition, the knight. But this is a very, very kind of mythologized figure, and we're going to look at kind of knights as they were in the Middle Ages in Europe, and their kind of their Japanese equivalent, and their role, and you know, obviously the knight probably did precious little adventuring really, but we need to find ways to kind of take the historical realities and merge that into something that approximates a kind of a fun and exciting adventure character. Then we're going to look at the vexed topic of villains. This is the first probably of several podcasts where we're going to talk about villains and villain design. And I think villain design is actually a thing. It's not just a kind of a concept we've just cooked up here. You have to be able to really write an exciting and convincing bad guy. So we're going to have a crack at that today. So we kind of got yin and yang, or yin and yang, sorry. We've got light and dark, noble warriors, evil villains. And maybe there's a little bit of crossover and inversion there possible as well. Anyway, on to our news section. And by the way, check out all the links below that go in the show notes, because today we've launched our preview page for the Book of the Phantasm. The Book of the Phantasm is coming in on November the 15th. It's going to be really, really exciting. It's going to be an amazing Kickstarter. We're really, really looking forward to it. So the Book of the Phantasm, to summarise, is about a parallel dimension that clings on to the mortal realm that most people can never perceive or enter, and its inhabitants are hungry for the fate energies inside mortals, inside the fate-touched mortals. And the Phantasm is the product of the Sundering. When the one god, the Keeper, died, a trickster entity called Onychius that was hiding in the Keeper's shadow managed to use his energies in order to create the Phantasm, and he takes with him into the Phantasm 5 jewels, and these 5 jewels are prized from the Keeper's mind, and they turn out to be 5 very unpleasant avatars that wage endless war on Onychius and raise armies full of strange and monstrous creatures. So the Phantasm is kind of a world that's rocked by warfare, and the book that we have 95% written, features new character origins, new character classes. We've thrown in there 2 new casters, the Mirror Mage and the Seer, which you're going to really, really enjoy. The Mirror Mage is able to find fragments of the mirror dimension that float through the world and create all sorts of cool things out of them, and the Seer can see into different realities and do all sorts of exciting things as a result. And we've thrown in there a 2-part, probably a sort of 6 or 7 session adventure, journeying through the Phantasm on a rescue mission, upon which hangs the fate of the 5 dimensions itself. So we are super excited. So do please click on the link and add your details in, and you'll get an alert when the Book of the Phantasm is ready to fund and going live. So we're really, really looking forward to that. You can get yourself a copy of the Arclander. The Arclander, Tales from the Arcverse, is now available. We successfully kickstarted that in March, and we've put that together. It's now ready to download. It's got some amazing artwork in it. We've introduced 2 new character origins, the Skabak and the Ryvik. Skabaks are acrobatic mercenaries who can take either a sort of a rather goblin-like appearance, or there are 9 human archetypes that they can masquerade as. They only get to masquerade as one of those, by the way. 9, so you get 9 different human versions of the Skabak. And they're a devil with a quarterstaff. And then you've got the Ryvik, who are one of my favourites. They're these dreadful little creatures, these humanoid sort of rats that walk on their hind legs. A bit like Reapercheap from The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, if he was kind of an obnoxious down and out. If Reapercheap was doing the 1977 Sex Pistols Grundy interview, drunk with a foul mouth on him, that's kind of what the Ryvik are like. And they are experts with throwing knives. So we really want you to have that. There'll be a link below again, and I think you're really, really going to enjoy that. There are 2 adventures in there. There's a feature on Vowbinders, which is our version of the Warlock, and their otherworldly patrons, including the giant and hideous worm Erethamuge. And I've been waiting to bring Erethamuge to the Arcverse for a long, long time. He's a kind of a truly hideous and yet brilliant creation. So there we go. That's our kind of 2 main bits of news. Obviously, the really cool news is this podcast is now starting to expand its global reach. We've had listeners, as we always have in the UK and the USA, but we started to have listeners in India, in Greece, in Sri Lanka, and in Morocco, of all places. So it just goes to show that wherever you are a couple of paces away from somebody with a 20-sided dice and a copy of the Silmarillion. It's just a worldwide phenomenon, and the more people that we can interact with, and the more people that we can talk to about their ideas, their visions, so much the better. Because sci-fi and fantasy and roleplay gaming is this wonderful global fraternity that we love to be part of. Okay, so let's talk about knights. Okay, so knights are one of the sort of the key aspects of feudalism. I know in earlier iterations of D&D there was this notional fighter, somebody with a sword and a shield that was just good at going around and hitting things. But who would have been the militarized, the militarized people in a medieval society who had swords and shields? It would have been a knight. Knights were like the middle ranks of feudal society. Kings would rely upon them not only to join in wars, things like the in England's case, beg your pardon, the Third Crusade, but also to administer the land, administer justice to the peasants. As you all probably know, when the Norman conquests happened, William the Conqueror parcelled up England. And then later, when the Normans invaded Wales, parcelled up parts of Wales. The Norman and then Plantagenet kings parcelled up parts of Wales into noble estates, and these were broken down into knights' feus, FEU. This bit of land that was given on promise to the knight that they administer it, and the knight would have a role in ensuring that the peasants were treated well, but the peasants also had to behave themselves, abide by the law, work hard for the shire, the reeve or the bailiff or whoever else was kind of putting their feet to the fire. They could be punished in all sorts of ways for slacking off and being lazy. And the knight was a key part of the process of kind of rent extraction. You paid rents to the king. We talked about currency a while back, but the king issues currency. It sort of trickles through society. It is taxed back, but you have to perform work in order to get the currency, in order to pay part of it back in taxation, and the rest to live off and eat. So it's a way of, in this kind of Marxist way of looking at it, a way of kind of extracting surplus labour value. And the knight's job is to kind of facilitate that. Knights would be required to join the king in warfare. And knights would be the difference between a knight and a peasant who, say, knows how to use a bow or a pike is that the knight probably has access to weaponry. Knights would have their own armour and swords and things like that. These things are obviously very expensive, and sumptuary laws and other regulations meant that the peasants didn't have access to these kinds of things. A peasant might have something in their home like an axe or something else that could double up as a kind of a farm implement when they wanted to go and do something violent. But they don't have sort of proper things that are made specifically for battle purposes, like swords. Also because they're very expensive. The French nobility ensured that their peasants specifically were disarmed. The idea of an armed peasantry was not something that sat well with the French nobility at all, and it was one of the reasons why they had a great deal of difficulty creating armies that were up to the job of defeating the English at the beginning of the 100 Years' War. Okay, so to move slightly beyond that, when you create a knight character, and unless you want to go through this very, very specific, very historically accurate campaign where the knight does have to spend half their time listening to peasants' grievances about the border between one field and another, or who has the rights to herd their pigs on grazing land. If you want your knight off doing adventures and the such like, you can your knight might be something more akin to the Knight Templars, where they are part of a militarized order that specifically had a role in guiding people to the holy sites. We have our own order of Templars, the Hypostic Knights, that guide mourners to the holy sites at Dankare, where the great and the good of the Arklands are buried. You might have your knight character be something akin to the Japanese tradition of Ronin, where a knight's master has died, or somehow their fiefdom has been destroyed, the shogunate or whatever has been destroyed, and so the restless knight must reclaim their honor by wandering from land to land and doing whatever they have to do. Righting wrongs, that kind of thing. Your knight might be a mercenary. And in the European Middle Ages, at least, significant numbers of them were bulking out armies that needed required extra bodies, that kind of thing. It's hard to imagine a knight that doesn't have. I mean, you can. One of the reasons why this sort of rather generic figure, the fighter, was a D&D favourite, is it's hard to imagine a knight that doesn't have some sort of socio-political context, some sort of bigger story behind them. I always remember the example in Dragonlance of Stern Brightblade, who's one of the Knights of Solamnia, and Caraman, who's simply a fighter, who's essentially someone that kind of grows up in a pub and is good with a sword, and rather large. And there is a key distinction between the two of them. One of the things, of course, that would have educated or separated knights from ordinary folk, and certainly one of the things in Japan that separated the samurai from non-samurai commoners, was these ideas of kind of chivalry and culture. The samurai were meant to be kind of aesthetes. They not only were expert swordsmen, but they also engaged in drama and poetry and elaborate tea ceremonies, and they were people who understood and appreciated and abided by these various kind of principles of philosophical principles and aesthetic principles. And if you were a European knight, it would be expected that you did understand and participate in things like hunting, game hunting. The forests of England were the preserve of the Normans. They were commoners were forbidden from going in them, and poachers would have been hanged. Hunting boar and stag, and engaging in things like falconry and other kind of pursuits of gentlemen, and knowing the right language and protocol to stand before a king and know how to address a king. These are all things that a knight was expected to know. So you might find, if you're writing a knight character, then they're not really like a standard warrior, that they have to have this additional, what you call kind of education of power. They have to understand the language of power, and they have to understand the aesthetics of power, and they can't simply spend their time going around acting like a kind of a sociopath with a sword. Knights, for what one reason and another, even perhaps knights of kind of evil lords, are there to maintain a certain sort of order. Even if you have an evil lord who governs over a dark realm, that dark realm has to function. The people in it have to eat. They have to be assured that bandits won't take their land. They have to have assurances that their neighbours won't kidnap their children, because otherwise nothing functions. Even evil has to have an order. There you go. And so a knight has a kind of a pivotal role in all of that. I don't imagine many people particularly want to play evil characters, but I'm sure some do. But you might find that your knight, in order to be with an adventuring party, has a particular mission that he's sent, or she is sent to. Sorry, I've got very gendered today. I do apologise. That they are. There you go, safe territory. That they are sent to complete, but it becomes very tempting at a certain point when you've got characters that have wider social and cultural ties. Just simply forget about that, and have months later or years later some vague intervention from a king somewhere. Well, you might find that interesting role-playing emerges from in a knightly character. They can't simply do what they want all the time. They have to uphold the laws of their king, or the interests of their king or their queen, or their ruler, and they have to they have to be kind of constrained by that. A paladin has a more kind of religious code or a spiritual code. And they're acting on behalf of some kind of good deity, whereas a knight doesn't have to do that. In the Arcverse, we have about half a dozen knightly orders, where different skills are go with the knightly order training. But these orders all have principles and values that must be observed, from the Trail Keepers to the Ember Legion. So it's about when you place a character into a social or cultural or economic or political context, that context has a bearing on what happens with the character, obviously. And much like if you have what in standard D&D is a warlock, what we would call a vowbinder, that vowbinder has to actually serve their master, and the vowbinder has taken it upon themselves to make a deal with a powerful and perhaps even evil entity, and they have to keep that end of the bargain up. Otherwise, it's kind of role-playing without the stakes, and that, I think, makes for really, really kind of weak gameplay. Sometimes you make a deal with power, and power comes to collect. Okay, let's talk villains. Okay, so again, it's easy to make a two-dimensional villain. It's easy to create a bad guy or a bad woman who is just there to antagonize the party. If you imagine a sort of like a TV show where it's a weekly episode, that then the episodes don't really relate to one another particularly, but the heroes turn up one week and then there's a particular problem. It's a Star Trek-y type thing, and a particular antagonist, and within 45 minutes or half an hour they have to have understood the nature of the threat and overcome it, and then finally dealt with the antagonist. You can make RPGs a bit like that, and I think they're all the weaker as a result. That people sit down to the game session and think, well, who's the baddie this week? And because it's like a baddie of the week, we never get to know them. We never get to understand what motivates them. because the PCs aren't interested in understanding what motivates them. They're interested in defeating them, and I think that's wrong. Or I think you can do it, but I think it makes for much weaker gameplay. Where I think the real gold comes from is in having the villain that you can have as a recurring villain, but also the villain that has their own core motivations. Their own core motivations that might be directly related to the PCs. They might see the PCs as their arch nemesis. They might see them as an annoyance after adventure. After the first time they've been defeated, they might see them as somebody who can be drawn into a trap. They might want their revenge. But you've got to find ways of making this villain come alive. But what you don't want to do is go full Anakin. Okay. By the time of the dreaded Star Wars prequels, by the end of those, Darth Vader wasn't scary anymore. Darth Vader was just a kind of idiot in a suit. By the time they'd explained the story of Hannibal Lecter wasn't scary anymore. But Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs is one of the most awesome and chilling cinematic performances of all times. You can easily kill a good baddie by explaining it away. The problem that you get is you need to have the baddie to be kind of relatable. I mean, when you look at Thanos in Avengers Endgame, he's able to articulate his philosophy, however kind of Malthusian and fascistic that is. He's able to articulate it. You know what's motivating him. He thinks it's for the greater good, and so, but all bad guys do. After many years of teaching history and working as a Holocaust educator, I can reliably inform you that the Nazis did not see themselves as the bad guys, or a vast majority of them didn't. Maybe there were a few. Most of them thought that they were doing something that had to be done for the survival of Germany and for the survival of European civilization. And they assumed everyone trying to stop them had somehow been tricked by the Jews. This was the assumption. The people who carried out the final solution did not see themselves as the bad guys. A vast majority of them anyway. So villains rarely see, and the way to kind of create a meaningful villain is to understand that they are motivated by things that they consider to be entirely reasonable. You might have the villain who is motivated by avarice. Rarely do I think that makes up for a decent villain, particularly a villain that just wants lots of money. Well, what for? And then you get to a kind of a second order of understanding. What they want this wealth for? To build a kingdom, create a weapon, open a dimensional doorway. What for? In building a kingdom, or to leave a legacy behind for the generations of people that will come in their dynasty. In addition, or to create a mighty weapon. Why? To avenge some terrible wrong done to them and their kin centuries beforehand. To create a dimensional doorway to cross into the land of the dead to be with their beloved once more. Of course, all of these things are inevitably going to involve an awful lot of collateral damage. Also, people will have to die in order for this to occur. And so there is the PCs are then drawn in to prevent all of this. That's the kind of, it's almost the sort of the Marvel movies relatable villain approach. Gore the God Butcher to Thanos. Even sort of the kind of these sort of genocidal monsters like Ultron wants to sort of destroy all of humanity in order to pacify the world. It's still motivated by something that is kind of ostensibly benign. You can have the villain from within, the villain who is the traitor, who betrays partly because they are afraid of what will happen to them if they don't, or they've become so jaded and angry with the supposed good guys, and so resentful, that they see betraying as a way of kind of articulating, look, I was right all along. There's a bit in The Matrix when after Cypher has betrayed Morpheus and Trinity and Neo, that he feels he has to justify himself. He says, Morpheus lied to us. He left us he told us to leave the Matrix and we never should have done. He left us kind of eating garbage in some horrible kind of tin can hovercraft for years on end. Whereas really, the Matrix, we were perfectly fine there. Part of the reason for that is that not only does it make for a great bit of dialogue, great bit of exposition, but villains need to have some way of justifying themselves. It's an intrinsic need that because we can only look at it from a human perspective, that we human beings need. Once again, every terrible tyrant in the world, from Stalin to Mao to Hitler, has written, long tracts and speeches and diaries and documents and all this stuff after they've done something truly, truly dreadful, or authorised something truly, truly dreadful, saying why it was necessary. If you look at it from this perspective, this was actually the right thing to do. Hard, but right. And that's kind of how a villain might see themselves. You can have low-level villains, I suppose. Is there something villainous about Biff in Back to the Future? Yes, he's kind of the low-level asshole who everybody hates. And part of the motivation of a character like that is they're motivated by their own kind of fear and hubris, and that basically bullying is part of their way of navigating the world and living their authentic selves and all that kind of stuff. So that's another approach, but we're talking about low-level villains. When you look at villains like Sauron or Morgoth, their desire to dominate Middle-earth is really to stick two fingers up to the Valar, to go. It is the love of destruction for its own sake, the love of domination for its own sake. The other kind of villain I think is really important to look at is the Joker type villain. And I'm talking the Heath Ledger Joker from Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. Where Michael Caine's Alfred says, Master Wayne, I'm not going to do my Michael Caine impression, but Master Wayne, sometimes some men just want to watch the world burn. Now, there you've got an interesting character. A character who defies explanation. We've focused so far on villains who are explicable, and probably that's the easiest one to write. The Joker, part of his uniqueness is he defies explanation. He simply refuses to be explicable. He simply says, where there is order, there is chaos. You are order, Batman. I'm chaos. That's what I do. It's what I should do. It's what I've been. It's what the universe kind of asks of me. And in a way, Batman, you have created me. If it wasn't for your need for order, maybe I wouldn't exist. It's a really interesting proposition. That's a harder character to write into an RPG, because the players will naturally want the villain to make sense. They will naturally want the villain to be explicable and have some kind of internal logic and meaning. And maybe they don't. Maybe they just want to watch the world burn. What about a villain that is timeless or doesn't have the time constraints on them that mortals do? Some sort of demon. A villain like Pinhead in Hellraiser. Pinhead's job is to travel time and space, causing pain and anguish, because it's somehow kind of, I suppose, sort of kind of arousing or pleasurable, or in some way kind of like a sadomasochism. And probably because they get souls for hell and all that kind of stuff, and they've probably got to keep up a quota. But a character like Pinhead is timeless. Either they've existed for a long, long time, or because they exist outside of our reality, time doesn't apply to them. A character like Kang the Conqueror in Marvel exists beyond the confines of time, and how do they relate to mortals who are time constrained? I mean, we all know we have a certain rough understanding of how long probably we've got. Could be hit by a bus tomorrow, but hopefully not. I think it would be very difficult for an entity that has an unlimited amount of time in which to exist, or an entity where time doesn't even apply to them at all, for them to be able to relate to a mortal at all, other than sometimes to reflect to them the briefness of life. A sort of a reversal almost of Roy Batty in Blade Runner. He says, all these things I've seen will be lost like tears in rain. Where some sort of demon might say, well, you can be gone in a second. In theory, I could just wait for you to grow old and die, but I've got sort of stuff to do right now as well. In Lord of the Rings, there was this is sort of kind of referred to by Elrond, who says to Arwen, even if Aragorn survives all this, he'll still grow old and die. It's not really going to work out between the two of you. And I think there has to be a very, very particular, quite sophisticated bit of role-playing done where you kind of encounter these things and you find a way. I mean, obviously you have to have the villain has to be killable somehow, but the villain has to be defeated by something with a much, much shorter lifespan than them, and something with arguably far less power. And how you write that is the interesting question. And perhaps it's that the immortal villain, or the very long living villain, or the non-temporal villain has missed something, and there's something they don't understand, and they don't really understand that temporality and mortality brings something with it that they can't capture. Oh, this is good, isn't it? I've just thought of this. That they get all these benefits and boons from being eternal, but they don't think like mortals. Mortals have to think on their feet in a much, much more complex way, and mortals have to value things much more so than they do. And I think that you draw that out, you've got some really interesting dialogue and really interesting role playing that you can have. That's where I go with it anyway. Well, I've always found it kind of one of the kind of problematic characters in a way, villains in a way, is Smaug, that is motivated to hoard and to control, which is, I mean, it's a great motivation, really, really interesting. But you might think, what is, perhaps it's I think it's meant to be as a particular weakness of dragons to want to hoard shiny things, and yet this is a super ancient, super powerful entity that can't see beyond the allure of the material. Anyway, that's just my take on it. Okay, so we're going to finish in a little bit. We'd love to hear from you on this podcast. You can email us at verseonlinerpg@gmail.com, or you can get us at versehome on Twitter. We'd love to find out, firstly, where in the world you are and where you're listening to this, and also what you play, what you enjoy, what stuff you're into. Are you a Kickstarter? Are you a world builder? And if you haven't checked out any of the Arklands stuff, go down to the show notes, click on the links, get your stuff there, because we'll be putting out some amazing content, including our new Kickstarter, in the next few months. So do come and join us. We are world builders for a reason. We want to throw the doors open to everybody. And always remember, forge your power. Thanks very much for listening, everybody. Take good care, comrades. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed Arklanders Assemble, remember to subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends, or give us a shout out. We'll need an army to stop the darkness that's coming. You can find us on Discord, World Anvil, YouTube, Twitter, DriveThru RPG and Kickstarter, and the links are available in the show notes. Catch next week's episode on iTunes, Spotify and all good pod hosters, and come and find us on social media. We'd love your feedback.